Here on YouTube and on all social media, there is a lot of anti-Calvinistic information out there. People from Arminian persuasions or Pelagian persuasions want to argue against Calvinistic soteriology, Calvinistic theology. And through the years, I have seen so much of this material that it does seem kind of repetitious. They all make the same basic arguments. But the other day, I was dialing around on Facebook, or on YouTube, in fact, and the algorithm fed me a suggestion that I could see was going to be yet another anti-Calvinist kind of presentation, but I got curious. It's like eating Twinkies. I know it's not good for me, but every once in a while, you just have to indulge. And so I fired up the video. Let's see what this fella has to say. He didn't take the typical tact, which I give him credit for. Usually what people do is they try to go through the 5 points and then try to show how each of those points is incorrect or anti-biblical in some way. But this guy took a more big picture view and said that we Calvinists, we of the Reformed stripe, that we make too much, we overemphasize the sovereignty of God. I found that curious, and actually, it's something that I've heard 20 years ago from Adrian Rogers, the idea that we, what he called extreme Calvinists, go to extremes when we talk about the sovereignty of God. But if in fact God is indeed sovereign, by definition, that means that he has the power, he has the authority, he has the right to do whatever he wants to do with what is his. And that's the way that he describes himself in the Bible. Our God is in the heavens and he can do whatever he pleases. That's what he's actively engaged in. So I don't know how, given a genuine biblical understanding of what sovereignty is, I don't know how you overemphasize that, because the sovereignty of God is an absolute condition, an absolute situation. And I don't know how you argue that we talk about extreme absolutism. To be absolute is already extreme. I think you get the idea. I don't know how you can overemphasize the sovereignty of God. Well, he was willing to overemphasize the free will of man. And of course, he went through the regular stuff. John 3:16, God so loves the world. He went to 2 Peter 3:9, God is not willing that any should perish. He, of course, didn't finish that sentence. And based on that, he was arguing that since God says things like, choose you this day, that means that men have the capacity, the libertarian free will, that was the phraseology he used, the libertarian freedom to make choices. He also said that we do not have the freedom to choose our consequences. All you have is the freedom to choose your actions, but you have no control over the consequences. Which, by the way, means that your will is actually limited. It's not a libertarian free will if you don't get to choose your consequences. If you don't have control over the outcome, then your will's not free. There is some will that supersedes your will. Nobody ever chooses the bad stuff in life. We all naturally gravitate toward the path of least resistance. We all seek pleasure and avoid pain, and yet pain comes into our life, difficulty comes into our life, and consequences happen that we would prefer would not happen. But we can't do anything about it, which is a demonstration, which is proof that our will is limited. There is some greater will beyond ours that supersedes our will, and that takes you rather inexorably toward the will of God and toward the sovereignty of God, and that he's the one that determines those things and that there's nothing we can do about it. So when you're looking at the sovereignty of God, it is impossible to overemphasize, but we of the Reformed stripe, we emphasize God and his sovereignty not only in all things, but in particular in salvation. And this is just such an important point, and I know I've said it so many times, but if you look in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, the word free will doesn't exist. The only place that you find free will in the Bible is in the Old Testament in reference to votive offerings. After you had done all the required things, after you had given your tithes and your animal sacrifices, after you had done everything God required, if you wanted to give a little bit more, that was a votive offering, and that is translated free will in some English translations. But very, very important, the word free will is not found anywhere in the Bible in the context of salvation. Now, when it comes to salvation, yes, you're going to find words like election. You're going to find words like predestination. You're going to find he chose you from the beginning. All that language you'll find in the Bible in the context of salvation. But never, not once, do you find free will, and you never see the phrase libertarian free will anywhere in the Bible. That is a philosophical idea that people have to infer from the text because the text never plainly says it. So we who know that, we emphasize the sovereignty of God in salvation, whereas they want to emphasize man's free will, the sovereignty of man, the ability of men to choose and obligate God. That's what they emphasize when it comes to questions of salvation. So it really is a question of who gets the glory here. Does God get the glory in the salvation of human beings? Or does man get the glory in the salvation of human beings? Did Christ, in fact, save anyone, or did he just make people savable? And then he waited around to find out what people would do. So I argue that you cannot make too much of the sovereignty of God. The Bible makes a great deal of the sovereignty of God. And the sovereignty of God in salvation results in the glorification of God, and salvation all redounds to the glory of his grace, to use Pauline language. We, the saved ones, the chosen elect ones, will stand as trophies of grace in his kingdom forever. We are a demonstration of the grace and the power of God who would save wretches like us. And that's how the Bible describes it. The Bible never says, you know, Peter, you make a good argument there, but you're really making too much of the sovereignty of God. Paul, could you tone it down just a little bit and give man a little bit of credit here? You're making too much of the sovereignty of God. Instead, what you read from all of the apostles, what you read from all of the biblical writers, and especially the New Testament writers, when speaking about the subject of salvation, they all give the glory to God and God exclusively. They never include that men by their will made some choice or obligated God, or did some good work that got them saved. It is always God who does it. So that just kind of caught my attention yesterday when I heard this fella say that we Calvinistic Reformed people, we make too much. We overemphasize the sovereignty of God. And I think that's impossible. I think the sovereignty of God is why any of us get saved. And boy, you can't make too much of that. The grace of God is a direct result of the fact that he can do whatever he wants with what is his. And the judgment of God is a result of the fact that he can do whatever he wants with what is his, because he is, in fact, stop me if this is too obvious, he is, in fact, sovereign. All right. Thanks for listening to me rant about an Arminian guy on the internet. Talk to you soon. Bye.